There was an article that appeared in the Seattle Times just this past Friday that detailed a crime that's been going on there in the Seattle area for a little while. It seems like there's a con artist there that's been posing as a police officer and calling elderly women to get them to help him, supposedly with a counterfeiting operation at a local bank. He calls them up and tells them that their bank or some employee at their bank is making counterfeit bills and is swapping them out with the money at the bank to pass them off that way. And they've made an arrest, but they're going to need their help, her help, because she's got money on deposit at that bank. They're going to need her help to be able to find out the remainder of those that are involved in this scheme. Easy for them now to be able to get a large number of the people from a region under their authority and to put themselves up as kings over a region. They've got powerful weapons. What they're going to do, they propose is to them, these weapons that were being used were wonders, unlike anything that man had available to them. was that she wasn't too thrilled about the idea of marrying a god. So one day as he goes to kiss her, she bites him on the lips. And when he pulls back, he has blood running out of him. And a man points and says, he's no god. He bleeds like we do. And that starts the rebellion at that place. And soon one of the kings is beheaded and the other runs off. Madness overtakes him. He ends up sitting out in the midday sun in the very hot region of southern India and ends up dying from overexposure. So goes Rudyard Kipling's tale of men who would be kings, of men who would rule, of men who would even pretend to be gods in order to be there. And even their death, they proved that they were not worthy of that place. There are a lot of people who are attempting to take God's throne, to rule instead of him. In this world, there are a lot of false religions. Hundreds of different religions. Thousands of gods being worshipped around the world at this time. And while Christianity is the largest religion in the world at this present time, while it outnumbers any of the other religions, when you total up the other religions, the vast majority of humankind believe in other gods than the one true God. Many times as many people believe in false gods as there are who believe in the one true God. And each of them is in denial of the power of God. Each one is attempting to take his place and rule over the hearts of men. Some who are attempting to seek his throne, though, aren't pretending to be gods themselves, but they are raising themselves up as false authorities which are in denial of God. They would attempt to steal God's throne out from under him by denying his existence. It's not just the claims of other gods which would seek to replace him. There are the others who offer worldly authorities and human philosophies which would claim more authority in the hearts and minds of men, would tell people that they don't need to believe in God any longer. Our colleges are breeding grounds for worldly wise men who want to place a social obligation at the hearts of people or foolish speculation above God. Our entertainment is also filled with the promotion of those false authorities. And any claims God has made in his word are laughingly denied in our news media and in the public place by those claiming to know so much more than those fools who believe in God. I even saw a report last week about a public cemetery in Alaska, an Alaskan community, which refused to allow a grieving family to engrave on their mother's grave the word Jesus, the name Jesus, or to put on her tombstone the Christian fish symbol, because the authorities there, the bureaucrats, said it would offend people by having those things on their mother's tombstone. We have a lot of people who object to the person of God and would rule him out of existence in our hearts if they are permitted to do so. They are vying for God's power and trying to displace him. And some of the people who attempt to steal his throne are in fact people who would assume God's place in their own lives. People who attempt to seat themselves on the throne of authority. Anyone who prefers their own way over God's way is attempting to replace their rule for his rule. Some of those who even attend churches, you can see that they rule their own lives and they don't follow God's instruction in theirs. They push God to one side in the choices that they make daily. There are many vying for God's throne. But our passage today brings us to the second point, and it's really the heart of our text here. There is only one God. Our passage says only one is majestic in holiness. God's nature is different from the nature of anyone else who would claim his throne, anyone else who would attempt to sit where only he deserves to sit. He shows his worthiness for the highest place, his majesty. God reveals by his holiness. Who else is so perfect, so loving, so kind, so consistently good as our God? Kings and rulers among men have shown themselves unworthy for their places of reign by their flawed characters. It's happened throughout history. Every human who has occupied a place of authority over other men has shown themselves to be flawed and in that way unworthy of the office that they hold. Saul, the first king of Israel, when they decided they needed a human king, was chosen, selected by God because he was a young man who was devout in his faith, who believed sincerely in God, who wanted to do God's will in his life. But it didn't take him very long in his rule over men before he found that he was very attracted to the praise of men. And he wanted to draw their attention to himself instead of to God. And in that basic flaw in his character, he ended up taking the nation of Israel and bringing them under the thumb of their enemies to bring about the ruin of his own throne. David, who followed him on the throne of Israel, the second king of Israel, was a man after God's own heart, a man who was devout and loving of God, who wrote many of the Psalms that we still use today and are part of our scriptures. Here's a man that sincerely wanted to be the very best man that he could be for God. Again, a man chosen by God for that position because his heart belonged to God. And yet it wasn't long in David's rule before he found out that he was flawed in character. He was a bad father. He was an adulterer. And eventually he was a murderer. And all these things showed how unworthy he was to rule. His kingdom was in constant chaos, and David was constantly running for his life because of the faults of his character that permeated his rule. And so we've seen the weaknesses and failures of every human leader throughout history. The best and the worst of them are flawed, and not one of them has the majesty that God has, because they do not have his perfect character. Only God is truly majestic, because only he is holy. Only he is fit to rule from the highest throne. Our text tells us that there is only one who is awesome in praises. You know, everything today is said to be awesome. Did you see that new show on TV? It's awesome. Do you see what I can do on the computer? It's pretty awesome. Do you see that completion in the fourth quarter of the game? That was awesome. I just beat the Guinness Book of World Records for the most bounces on a pogo stick. That's awesome. We can go on forever. Everything seems to be labeled as awesome today. Awesome means, obviously, to inspire awe. Someone who inspires awe. And if we look at the Hebrew word that is translated in this passage, awesome, if we go back and look at that word, we see it comes from the same root and is in fact the same word as the Hebrew word for fear. And we come to understand that what's being said of God's awesomeness in this passage is that he is so unusual, so high above us, so inconceivable to the human mind, that to acknowledge who God is grips our hearts with fear. It makes us to have our heart beating like a bass drum. It makes our jaws drop. It makes our eyes widen, because God is so much more than anything we can comprehend and understand. He is awesome. Only God is of that nature. Only God is truly awesome. When we say here in this passage, awesome in praises, I don't want you to get confused there about that. It doesn't translate very well into the English language here. This isn't saying that God is to be regarded as above all other gods because he's really good at praising. That's not what it's saying here. It's saying that God is so awesome that we can't help but praise him. That's what it means by awesome in praises. That he fills us with so much awe that the only reaction we can have to that is to worship him. You can't recognize him without bursting forward in praise. Other gods might demand devotion of their followers, but only he is so awesome that every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That's awesome. That's awesome when we are compelled to worship just by beholding him, just by knowing who he is. Our God is awesome in praises. And he's the only one, our passage says, who is able to work wonders. Now there's a lot of gods claiming a whole lot of things out there, making all sorts of promises. They're just like politicians in that, aren't they? All these promises of things that they're going to do. You sacrifice your firstborn to me, I'll make the crops better next year. All the promises of all these false gods. And yet they can't deliver on them. Over and over again, the false gods prove that they are unable to do anything beyond the imagination of men, because they are not beyond the imagination of men. Only the one true God is truly able to work wonders. He proves himself to be true. You remember that contest between the priests of Baal and the one priest of God? Here's these scores of the priests of Baal and Asherah who make their altar at this contest and put their sacrifice on it. And they're dancing around the altar and they're calling out to God and they're cutting themselves and they're pleading with him for hours on end, and absolutely nothing happens. The altar remains cold. When finally in exhaustion they must give up, then the one true prophet of God steps up and he builds his altar and puts his sacrifice on it, and then he prays to God. And fire falls out of the sky so intense that it burns up the offering, it burns up the altar, and it burns up the ground underneath it. It burns up the water that had been poured over the altar. Our God is a God who works wonders, a God who does amazing things. Only God could part the waters and allow his people to pass through on dry land. Only God could heal the sick and turn water into wine and walk upon the surface of the water and restore the dead to life. He's the only God that's acted in human history in such a way as to leave even those who had denied him before, saying there is only one true God. The God of Israel is the one God. God is God alone. As he is revealed in his mighty works, there is none like him. I like what Matthew Henry's commentary has to say about this passage here. He writes, "Happy are the people whose God is the Lord. They have work to do, temptations to grapple with, and afflictions to bear. They are weak in themselves, but his grace is their strength. They're often in sorrow, but in him they have comfort. He is their song. Sin and death and hell threaten them, but he is and will be their salvation. The Lord is a God of almighty power, and woe to those that strive with their Maker. He is a God of matchless perfection. He is glorious in holiness. His holiness is his glory. His holiness appears in the hatred of sin and his wrath against the obstinate sinners. It appears in the deliverance of Israel and his faithfulness to his own promise. He is fearful in praises. That which is matter of praise to the servants of God is very dreadful to his enemies. He is doing wonders, things out of the common course of nature, wondrous to those in whose favor they are wrought, who are so unworthy that they had no reason to expect them. They were wonders of power, wonders of grace. In both, God was to be humbly adored. Our God is God alone. Our God is the only significant God. All others are the invention of human beings. All others are powerless. All others give glory to ourselves or substitute the evil for that which is good. Only God is great. In conclusion this morning, people sometimes ask, are you a cat person or a dog person? You know, cats and dogs are the two most common types of pets, so if you're going to be a pet owner, it's usually a choice between cats or dogs. You usually own one or the other, but there are vast differences between the nature of a cat and the nature of a dog. Cats are generally more independent. They don't consider themselves to have an owner. Rather, they see humans in the terms of what they can provide for them. Cats are affectionate, but on their own terms. If they want to be petted, they make it known. They rub up against your leg or they hop up into your lap to show you that they want some attention now, and it's your duty to provide it for them. If they've decided that your lap is the most comfortable place for them to be, and then you decide you need to get up and do something else, they look at you like, hey, I just got settled here. What do you think you're doing? For most cats, don't even think about a leash, although they might prefer to have a leash for you if they just had the opposable thumbs to hold one. Try to play fetch with a cat. You throw a ball and the cat will look at you to say, you seem to have dropped something. You want to go get it? Given a place to lie on the back of a chair in a sunny window, a cat can ignore you for hours on end. But now dogs are a whole different kind of animal. They don't merely tolerate a human. They adore their master. They gladly acknowledge that you are their superior. They are fiercely loyal for the most part. And if you don't allow the Great Dane that you own to sit on your lap, he's going to find a way to be as close to you as possible. He's going to rest his chin on your lap, or he's going to lean up against your legs, or he's going to lay at your feet and put his chin across your shoes. But he'll find some place to be near as possible to the master that he adores. If you speak to your dog with a harsh word, the dog's going to cringe, and it's going to look up at you with those eyes of those wounded eyes, saying, what did I do? What did I do? Master's unhappy with me. Grabbing up a leash can make a dog circle around and bark and jump in the air. It's not that dogs can't run and walk without a leash, but when you get that leash, the dog understands Master wants to spend some time walking with me, and that brings them delight. A stick will often occupy a dog for as long as you want to keep throwing it. Although dogs do seem to become confused about whether the object is to bring the stick back to you or play tug-of-war with the stick, still they're glad to have your attention for as long as you want to give it to them. Now I'm going to ask you this morning, are you a cat person or a dog person? And I don't mean, do you prefer to own a cat or do you prefer to own a dog? I'm asking, what's your response to the Master? What's your response to God in your life? Do you think as a cat would that he is only there to serve your needs? Do you think that he should respond to you when you want him to and to be willing to be ignored the rest of the time by you? Will you accuse him of wrongdoing when he doesn't conform to your will? Or do you think more like a dog would, that he is so much superior to you, and it's good to just spend time in his presence? Do you want to do what he would have you to do? Do you delight in being near him? Are you humbled by the thought of his displeasure? There is none like our God, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders. Will you acknowledge that by giving him your life? This morning we have an invitation time. If you'd like to claim Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior for the first time, if you'd like to devote your life to him or to renew that commitment to him, we want you to have this opportunity to make that decision. We invite you to come forward this morning as we stand and sing our invitation song, You Are God Alone.